Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got James Marland from SAP, and we're going to talk about storytelling and how to use stories within the sales process. James, thank you so much for joining us. You're well dressed as ever.
Well, I like to be consistent with my Twitter profile, which says likes hats and hates PowerPoint. So I think that sort of summarizes it nicely. So you tend to find me out on LinkedIn. That's my main way people get in touch with me. So James Marland, as in my name down the bottom there, on LinkedIn. I also see me on Twitter, but please feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. I've got some resources there for people. I work for SAP. I'm in sales for SAP. And now I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we communicate what we sell at SAP to our potential customers so they can understand what we're on about. Because let's face it, in the world of corporate, we can be a little bit PowerPoint bullet overload. And so trying to find ways to cut through that so that people actually understand the messages we're trying to convey.
I think quite often, can't we, in corporate land, we come up with our own language and jargon.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if we speak this, then everybody knows how clever we are. And of course,
that is in a typical corporate world, we spend perhaps more time speaking internally than we do to the customer. And so we think that the language we're using internally is going to be understood by anybody outside the company. And whether it's in initialisms or shortcuts or slang, oftentimes it's not. And so we have to find ways to speak to customers in language that makes sense to them.
And what we need to do, and I'm guessing, James, and it's about ultimately what your job is to do is to explain and to persuade.
Yes. So my original career was in pre-sales. So I had both elements of that. So, we sell software, and SAP is broad and it covers many processes in many industries. So just explaining, how important it is to match your supply and demand in MRP run, that's one thing, but also to persuade customers that our approach is what they need. It'll help them solve their business problems, and it's better than the other guys. So yes, it's looking at storytelling, particularly in the area of explanation and persuading.
Why do you think that we still hold on to PowerPoint? I've just finished. My partner bought me this book for Christmas.
Oh yeah,
and I've just finished reading that, and it's the first thing it says is, don't come onto the stage and read PowerPoints.
Right, but I mean, I do a lot of videos. I think you do as well, Tim. And to do a well-done video takes a lot of time. And especially if you're, trying to be very careful about the words you use. And TED has a very restricted window. I think it's, 10 minutes tops, right? Short.
I think it's 18, something like 18 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, but that's pretty tight. And sometimes I'm asked to do something. I had to do a kickoff last week. I was told to do a video in 2 minutes. And that required, almost a day of work to think down how could I get the message done in a short period of time, but still be impactful. And that's really the challenge. That's why this idea of telling stories works well, because when you're telling a story, or as I'm going to talk about later on about doing a metaphor, people kind of understand. They I know what he's doing, and they're ready to receive the information. You haven't got to sort of where they are right now. Remember, we're all working remotely, so people have walked into this meeting, just had coffee, put the kids off to school, hoovered walk the dog, whatever. Right? They're not in work mode a lot of the time, and so by using storytelling, you are actually communicating in where they are in the 2 minutes before they did your Zoom call, and that's become even more important with remote working.
So, talk us through what you mean by these metaphors and these and these stories. Talk us through that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to go about poetry or anything, but I mean, metaphor is a way that you explain something that is familiar to you, right? So something that is not known is explained in a context that is known. And so, Shakespeare says Julia is like the sun. Well, I mean, we know what the sun is. It's warm, it brightens, it lightens things up, and Juliet is like that. So that's a simple metaphor, and we kind of know what that means. And I believe that you can use the same approach in this. So I'm in the business of selling, cloud software. It's amorphous. It's not easy to get hold of, and so trying to come up with a simple metaphor for. Well, it's like this kind of. So one of the things that we come up with a lot is to explain, this has been SAP's message for many, many years, that, business is an integrated process all the way from sales to production, supply chain to billing to shipping to service. It's an integrated process, and it's really important that customers think about their process integrated. Fine, but we could draw boxes and give you lots of complicated things about MRP and digital supply chain and all this kind of stuff that we would typically have. But it's actually better to come up with a metaphor. So I have a metaphor that I've been using a lot. So one is the idea of a relay race. And this here is a ticket from the Rio Olympics. I love going to the Olympics. And so I went to this. This is the 4x100 men's final. So Usain Bolt and his team get the gold. But when I was there, the real surprising thing about that evening was there's the silver medalists with the Japanese. What? The Japanese? Yeah, those guys. Name a famous Japanese sprinter. Like, nobody can. I mean, they didn't win any individual medals, not even close, right? So how did they do so well? Well, because they figured out that to win a relay race, you don't choose the 4 fastest runners, right? That's not the way you win. You have the guys who work best as a team, and specifically on the handover and the skills around the handover, because a sprinter starts from the blocks when the gun goes and he dies for the tape. You don't do any of those things on a relay, right? You're starting in motion. You have to watch the other people and use your arms, run on a bend. It's all very different. And so they were successful because they focused on that. And so I say the same is true in business, right? You don't need to have the best individual process. That's not how you're going to be successful. You need to make sure that you're not dropping the baton between the processes. So focus on processes that are working well together, not plucking the best ones from this one. That's what the Brits did. That's what the Germans did. That's what the Americans did. You know what? They didn't get any medals. So that's a simple example of a metaphor that is used to explain a business process.
Okay, fantastic. And I think those are the things that we can understand them, and we can picture them, and more importantly, I think that we remember them. There's a famous do you know the cartoonist, the marketing guy who does the cartoons? So that he's the marketing cartoonist.
Don't think I know him, but go on.
And anyway, he did his cartoons go all over LinkedIn and stuff like that. And he there's one of his famous cartoons where he's basically someone who's actually pitching a product, and he says, but this is the brand story, and the brand story was the pitch. And I think quite often people will often say, yes, but it's all about stories.
Yeah, certainly the term storytelling is overused.
It's like thought leader. It's like one of these things that we use too much. And what happens is that actually the term storytelling has got lost in this piece of jargon. And it's like, buy my product because it's great. That's the story, right? No, that's not actually a story. That's just
if you go to a corporate page, any corporate Fortune 500 company, in the top right corner, they'll say our story.
Yes.
And it's just a bunch of marketing stuff. So, yes. I mean, storytelling is, I don't want to do it down. There's a lot of goodness in it. In fact, on my bookshelf, you'll see, Joseph Campbell's book about the hero's journey, which is a well-known framework for explaining stories. That's how Lord of the Ring works and Narnia and those things. That's fine. But I focus, and there's a lot of good resources on that and articles and so on. It's a well-worked idea, but I want to specifically focus on of metaphor or analogies. I use the words the same way, which is explaining something in the context of another. And so it's interesting because you can say, okay, well, relay race, I kind of know what that is, but you can also have something that you don't know anything about. So here's the same message. So I call this the deep truth. This is a quote from my minister at church, and he says, the story is the only way to transmit deep truths. Again, the story is the only way to transmit deep truths. So in business, the deep truth is, your business process is integrated. You need to have an integrated view. And so you can tell the story with the relay race. But here's another one, right? So this is, you look at my age. Do you remember these Brook Bond tea cards? Right. So
I remember those. Yeah.
There you go. It's a good British podcast, this. So when we had tea, I used to get a card in them. And these were, like in America, you had the idea of a cigarette card, same idea. And you got them in these books. And this is one from the 70s, and The Race into Space. This is my own copy. Because on page 41 here, so this is a rocket called the Europa rocket. Like, well, that's the Europa rocket. I never heard of that. It's the same time as the Saturn V. Like, well, never really heard about that rocket going to the moon. So what happened? Well, let me read you from my little card about the Europa rocket here. So Britain contributed the Blue Streak, the missile. France and West Germany built the second and third stages. Italy provided the satellite, Holland and Belgium the tracking and telemetry, and it was all launched in Australia. So how well did the Europa rocket work? You know what? It blew up every single time. It was not like the Saturn V, which had 14 successful launches, never went anywhere, right? Think about that. All these different components coming from different factories, different specifications being shipped out to Australia and assembled. You know what? It doesn't work. So, Mr. Customer, don't do that. Right? Don't try and get different bits from lots of different places and stick them together, light a candle and see if it works. Because a lot of times it just blows up on the launch pad. All right? It's not rocket science. So,
it's not rocket science, James. No.
Same deep truth, right? But this time, oh, I didn't know about that. So this idea that it has to be in a familiar context, not necessarily, right? So as a storyteller, you have a short amount of time. We haven't got long today on this podcast to get people's interest. And I usually say you have 90 seconds, a little less if you're remote, but a bit more if you're in the room. Before Tim says, this rocket thing, where's he going with this? I'm like, oh, no, now I see it. And in your mind, you're able to do the aha moment yourself, all right? And so by having that creativity firing in your own mind rather than me spoon feeding it, it's more powerful because you think, oh, I see. Yeah, it all has to fit together. You got it all tested. It's got to fit. Yeah, I see it. And so that's another example of another technique in making metaphors is don't necessarily restrict yourselves to domains that the customer knows. That's fine for some things, but also you can teach them things and you have some time. Let's face it, a lot of our corporate meetings are a bit boring. So let's talk about aeronautics for 90 seconds. That's interesting. Let's talk about opera singing. That sounds interesting. Let's talk about the 30 Years' War. I don't know anything about that. And there are stories that you can tell if you introduce, people like to learn stuff.
So you've got a little methodology, don't you? The 3 steps that you work through in terms of creating the story. So
yeah, that's right. So these are disciplines that everyone can control, practice to get better at this. So the first thing I call mining, which is you've got to find little metaphors out there, small things. And then refining, which is, okay, I've got something here. I need to get what I call additional points of congruence. I have to, so in the relay race, there are multiple sort of points of congruence in terms of there's a skill set involved, there's training involved, there's equipment involved, there's a coordination. So you can dig into multiple ways of explaining the allegory. And then finally is the staging, which is, this Europa rocket one is interesting because I read it in a Times article. And it's quite time to Matthew Syed, great author. Anyway, he was talking about it.
Yes, I love Matthew.
And so that was like the first part. But when I was thinking about staging it, I was thinking, you know what? I think I've got those cards somewhere. I remember this from somewhere, and I got my mother to dig it out of the attic. Do you still have those cards? Yeah, I've got them. Keeps everything, right? So now I have a personal story. So now I can tell it rather than, well, I read it in the Times, but let me tell you about when I was a little boy. I collected these cards, and here they are. Is actually, it has a personal way of doing it. So unfortunately, Tim, you can't copy it in quite that way, but you, of course, have your own experiences that you can then tell in a personal way. So that last bit is the staging. So the mining is, well, how can you find things? Well, just pay attention, right? That's one thing. Have a write things down. I'm an old-fashioned guy. I have the back of my moleskin. I have little colored pens for ideas. Here's an example. This came up literally 2 hours ago when I was doing some training with some what we call the early talent, which are younger people at SAP, as we say. And I was talking about how you get these stories. And I said, what do you know about curling? And I said, curling? Yeah, that's the Winter Olympics thing. We're quite good at it in Britain. So I said, okay. So, and I said that the interesting thing about different between curling and any other sport is in any other sport, once the projectile, which could be like a hockey puck or a baseball or cricket ball, once it's left you or your foot or your club, you cannot affect its trajectory, right? It goes where it goes, right? So the golf ball, it does its thing. It may be affected by things outside your control, perhaps like wind, but once the initial conditions of the coordinates and the spin and the velocity, it's going to go there, right? That's not true with curling, right? Curling is the only sport. You can brush it, right? So you can slow it, speed it down, curl it, go around it. And so I said, well, that's actually a metaphor of the between selling a product and selling a service, right? So when you sell a product,
Mm. Oh, thank you. And do you think? I mean, what about? I mean, Tom made the comment there about suspense. I mean, is there something about in telling it? I mean, are we looking at the similar sort of things? I don't want to say jokes, but the sort of. Mm, I can hear you. Yes. Yeah, because I was going to ask you because you're actually using um, you're using props rather than because quite often people will just put up a PowerPoint, but you're actually using a prop. Mm, 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 yeah, yeah, mm, yeah, mm, 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 mm. Right. Mm. I've actually taught salespeople storytelling, and it is absolutely mind blowing for customers because they're expecting, here's a slide, here's another slide, here's another slide, here's another slide, here's the slide with the graph going up, here's the graph, and when the salesperson comes on and you go, oh, and they go, let me tell you a story. You actually get people sitting up paying attention, and when they tell the story. I mean, when we were discussing this in the preparation, you told a particular story, and you said the customer remembered it, and they kept replaying it to people. Mm, 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 mm. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, yeah, I know, and I don't understand, James. I don't understand what that is. Um, mm, yes. Mm, 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 mm. Right. James, thank you so much for coming on. It's been fascinating. I love the subject about storytelling. I'm not sure about what the sound is. I've obviously got to investigate what that is. Um, I'm hearing you and you're hearing me. So from where we're transmitting, I don't know. I'll need to download the file and have a look. I will be posting a recording on YouTube. Yeah. But thank you so much. Remind people where they can get hold of you if they can hear you. Good. Good. James, thank you so much for coming on today, and I'll investigate the sound issue.